A company that has become synonymous with Delaware is about to become a shell of its former self. What will this state do without DuPont? The Delaware Way is next. I'm Larry Menti. Welcome to the Delaware Way. One of the biggest stories, a story that just shook Delaware, was the Dow-DuPont merger. A reporter that's been covering it for the News Journal and Delaware Online is Jeff Murdock. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
An enormous story, especially for the state of Delaware, but it's a big story also in Wall Street, a big story covered by the Wall Street Journal. Let's start with some basics. Was it really a merger? I know when they announced it, they called it a merger of equals.
Well, they are referring to it as a merger of equals, but if you look at it, it seems like Dow is the one coming into this from a position of strength. Dow is the one that isn't doing, so far has not done any layoffs, whereas DuPont is laying off 1,700 in the state alone, 5,000 worldwide. Dow is coming in with they're going to have a dual headquarters, but it looks like most of the stuff is going to be in Midland, Michigan. Dow's definitely coming into this from the position of strength.
If anybody with the DuPont family was still involved with the company, do you think this would ever happen?
No, I don't. And I think also if Ellen Kullman was still CEO, I don't think this would have happened. I don't think it's a coincidence that all of this started right after she left the company.
No, it almost seems like the board wanted her out so they could specifically do this.
I would agree with that statement. From what I've heard, I would absolutely agree that it seems like she was pushed out. They brought in Ed Breen, who comes in. He has a reputation for cutting. He has a reputation for making deals. That's what he did. He took over Tyco after Dennis Klosowski had his issues at Tyco and left the company. And Breen, what he did when he got to Tyco is he slashed. And it seems like that's what he's doing here. And it seems like it was priming the company for some sort of takeover, merger, something like that.
And so a whole lot of people involved late in the company, possibly, many of them involved late in the company, get to make a whole lot of money, and yet a lot of families and the state of Delaware are going to suffer, at least in the short term.
That's exactly right, especially when you look at the stock options for some of the people involved in this, and you consider that the stock is going to go up as the merger comes. It's already increased. Probably about maybe I'd say about $5 or $6 per share since the merger announcement's gone up. It kind of fluctuates per day, but they're going to make a lot of money. And then 1 out of every 4 Delaware DuPont employees is going to lose their job under this.
Well, how about some good news? Can we get some good news in this?
Good news is we've seen before when DuPont has had some issues. An example of that would have been when Bristol Myers Squibb came in and paid a lot of money for DuPont's pharmaceutical unit. A lot of people left the pharmaceutical unit and they started their own businesses. They started pharmaceutical startups. We had a good amount, and they stayed in Delaware. We had a good amount of, I don't want to say a good amount, we had a handful of businesses stay and start their own company. We could start seeing that again. We could start seeing, people, they want to stay in Delaware, their families here, maybe the state gives them some good tax incentives to start their own business, and they start a startup and be a scientific research-based, and that, hopefully will grow within the state.
Because you don't know, those startups could grow into something big. Any one of those startups, especially with the mind trust behind them, could grow into something much bigger.
And we've seen startups out of DuPont grow into something bigger. Insight's a great example of that. Endo Pharmaceuticals, which is now Malvern, that's another example. There have been examples of people who have left DuPont. They've started scientific-based companies that have gone on to be very successful.
But so in the long term you're talking about, because startups take time to grow a company, but in the short term, is there anybody moving in that can replace some of those jobs?
Well, the state's going to try to attract companies, but the question is who's out there to attract, and who's out there that's going to need the scientific space that DuPont occupies within Delaware. That's going to be difficult to follow. A good example is when ConocoPhillips left a suburb of Tulsa called Ponica City. Ponica City's government, because I did an article about this, I talked to some people at the Ponica City government, they were trying to bring in businesses. They replaced ConocoPhillips and those research jobs with a Purdue chicken plant. Those jobs, the scientific research jobs, and those companies that employ them they don't grow on trees. They're not easy to find.
No, we already have Purdue here, so that's probably not going to work. I want to change topics just a little bit, but it's kind of based on the same topic. Chemours, it was a spin-off of DuPont. based in Wilmington. A lot of people were worried about that. Actually, so many people were concentrating on Chemours, I think they took their eyes off DuPont for a while. Chemours is still in play as to whether it's going to stay here or move. What are you hearing?
I'm hearing mixed things. Right now, Pennsylvania and New Jersey are the two states that are competing for it. They're also competing, northern Newcastle County is also in competition for it. I have heard some people say Salem might be a good opportunity for them because they have the Chambers Works over there, which is already a big Chemours facility. It would be readily available. It would be just over the bridge, over the Delaware Memorial Bridge. So that's an opportunity, but also, I know southeastern Pennsylvania is also competing for it as well. That could be another possibility, and it remains to see what they would do in Newcastle County. I think one of the big issues is the DuPont building, which is DuPont's former headquarters that they vacated last year when they went out to the suburbs. Right. It's an outdated building. It's over 100 years old at this point. I've heard complaints from employees that they can't get cell phones to work in the building.
So they just want to get out of there.
I've heard unofficially that building's going to require about $4 million in upgrades.
If we lose DuPont, and I say lose loosely, I mean DuPont's diminished to just a shell of what it used to be, and then we lose Chemours. That's near a crisis.
That is near a crisis, yes, because that's a lot of jobs. I mean, that would be probably over 10,000 jobs we would lose. And also AstraZeneca shrinking as well. They've cut their research staff. So that's 3 companies that have had layoffs and cut staff this year, all within Delaware.
So there's not really any good news in the short term right now, unless Chemours stays. That would be good news.
Well, Chemours could stay. AstraZeneca is currently in the process of buying some of their research out from smaller pharmaceutical companies. If some of those drugs hit, that could help, and fuel some expansion. And the startups from DuPont. That's really what we're relying on here in Delaware.
Well, that's a lot of hope.
That's a lot of hope.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Thanks, Larry.
Jeff Murdock, you can read his stuff in the News Journal and on Delaware Online. When we continue, we're going to stay with this conversation about DuPont and Dow and talk to a guy that is involved in these type of acquisitions, mergers, and when companies move, to talk about how it's going to affect Delaware and his long-range and short-range outlook when the Delaware Way continues.